Hello, everyone. It is I, Dave, and as promised, I am here at 11 p.m. to talk to you about settings and kind of talking to you about creating your own, you see. But first, we're going to talk about myself. Now, I started playing Dungeons and Dragons back in 1999, um, almost 20 years ago. It was the summer vacation of 8th grade going into ninth grade, and it was a pretty decent time in my life. I had friends Nate and Carl. They introduced me to the game. Actually, it was my friend Nate who introduced me to the game. Um, my friend Carl, we were at his house and he said, "Hey Nate, why don't you show Dave this game? He'll probably really like it." And I had no idea what it was. I've never heard of it before. I was familiar with like fantasy and things like that. Um, I've seen movies like The Neverending Story, which I really love, Willow, um, the Conan the Barbarian movies. And this is something along those lines. So I was pretty pumped. Well, anyway, I had no idea what I was in for. So Nate says, "Yeah, okay, I'll show him." And he takes me into Carl's kitchen slash dining room area. And I'm like, "All right, so what's this game?" And I was asking, I was like, "Is it a board game?" And he's like, not really. I'm like, "Okay, is it a video game?" He's like, no. And I was like, "All right, well, I was confused at the concept at first. Like, I had no idea what a tabletop role playing game was. I was like, what is this?" And he explained to me like he had everything in his head. He was really good. He remembered everything. He's one of these smart kids that knew like he knows a lot, you know. And he's I don't know, he's got it all like inside like an encyclopedia. So anyway, he goes, "All right, we're gonna create characters, and you're gonna write it all down on this piece of paper." And I had no idea what I was doing. He was just going to tell it all to me. He's like, "These are the options. You can pick from these races, and you can pick from these classes." And I believe in the beginning he ran homebrew and he mixed a little Forgotten Realms in there. But the first character I made was a human fighter named Dave, who was named after myself. And then I made another character after one of my favorite RPG characters, Sephiroth at the time from Final Fantasy VII. I didn't know how to quite do that concept in the game, and he said, "Well, you can make a fighter mage, right? He can do both fighting and cast magic. The only drawback is you couldn't cast magic with armor on, at least not in second edition." He was a half elf fighter mage. My third character was this guy named Timmy, who was named after a kid in my class. The kid was rather short. He was a friend of mine. He was probably about a little over 4 foot at the time, whereas all of us were over like, just over 5 foot. And I made him the halfling rogue. And I remember the first game. I threw the rogue. Like that's what you do. You always throw the rogue. Right? This is my first time playing the game, and that's what I had my characters do. I had to throw him over an obstacle. My fourth character was just a mage. I think his name was Mikey Lou, and he had a split personality. And the split personality's name was Nate. Um, and he would change his stats around too, depending on his personality. Um, he was really liking kind of some of the ideas I was bringing to the table, never of playing this before, such as the split personality character. You could also pick the proficiencies in the beginning, and they had different types. They had your general, then they had the ones based on your like class type. For the rogue, for example, I was like, "Is there a sniper proficiency? I really want him to snipe with a crossbow," and it didn't exist. So he homebrewed that special for me. He thought that was a cool idea, so we did that. And after my introduction campaign of learning how to play the game, and this is back in the day when they had THAC0, so you had to count down to the armor class 0. Like your attack had to hit that. And the lower your attack, the better. The lower your armor class, the better. The lower your saving throws, the better. And all the charts were all off, like some stats would give you a plus at 12 and some would give you a plus at 15. Some stats weren't even like, would give you a minor plus at 15, but a plus to another thing at 16. And it didn't make sense. But, you know, you looked at the charts, you got the game, it wasn't too bad. Um, Played that for a bit. Played with my friend Carl, played with our friend Elliot. It was the three of us. The party was huge. I had four characters. Carl had like two, and I think Elliot had two. I just remember his Elven Ranger, but Carl had think a 7 foot tall half dragon ranger and a fairy. I don't know what the fairy was, but oh, we used to get in so many antics, and it actually flowed pretty well, even though there were so many characters. Pretty decent. I do remember my first time dungeon mastering though. Same summer, later in the year. Nate was the primary DM, but Carl wanted to DM a game for a little bit. He wanted to do an evil campaign, which we did, you know. And I remember my first time DMing. It was terrible. I personally didn't think it was terrible. They thought it was terrible. I remember setting them up in the middle of an area, right? And we were about 14 at the time, 13, 14. You know, that's how old we were. And I was like, all right, this many meters or miles to the north. There's this quest. You know, you gotta save a princess out of a cave from evil man or ogre or something. To the south, something crazy was going on. To the east, there was these like the city of educated ogres, right? Like civilized ogres. And then to like the west was like some sick royal, like noble or royalty's daughter. And they hated the concept of I gave them like four things, and they're like, dude, no games ever run like that. They were so picky, right? They criticized everything, but it didn't stop me. You know, like I continued to DM like later, but I just remember like the whole experience. You know, they would just bitch about everything, and they were like, why are the ogres civilized? Like I knew in my mind why I was civilized because I got the concept as a DM. You keep all the secrets up here. You know what I mean? You keep the plot points that the characters don't know up here. And I was like, don't you worry about that. I know why they're civilized. And they're like, no, you don't. I'm like, yes, I do. I know why they were civilized. I'll let you know a little secret. Had to do with a wizard, right? And these ogres, and this is coming from my 13, 14-year-old self. These ogres at the time, um, they were supposed to be like big, brutish, stupid creatures, but this wizard, I guess, took these ogres in, taught them civilization and manners and educated them. I don't know for how many years. You know, it was a quick little game. I had like 20 minutes to prepare for, so I barely came up with a backstory. And you know, over generations, they've had the civilization. This little town of ogres. You know, they were all civilized. None of them were like the knuckle draggers you saw. I was breaking the mold on them. You know, I went outside the box right away. It's the first thing I did. You know, it's the first thing I did. I didn't have any books either. You know, we had to go off of whatever books they had, and I personally, they didn't let me use any books. Um, but it was fine. You know, like whatever. I ran it. I learned. It didn't stop me from trying to play the game or try to DM ever again. I continued to DM, and I still DM to this day when I get the chance. One thing that I thought was really cool back about my second edition days was the player's handbook was for the players, right? Only the players could look at that. Well, not only the players could only look at that book. Same thing, you know, the DM could look at it too, obviously. But the Dungeon Master Guide and the Monster Manual, don't touch, don't look at it, don't peek inside, don't know anything about it. It made the game more mysterious. It made it more fun. Made it more interesting. So when you encountered a monster that you had no idea about, right? It was cool. Like you describe something from like let's say we'll take an ogre mage from the monster manual. I don't know what that is, right? If you described a dragon, I might know just because. But if you take something else that's not too common, I'm not going to know about that. That's pretty cool if I never read the monster manual. However, these days a lot of people, you know, they can look on their phones, they can they might buy their own monster manuals and look just out of curiosity. And I feel like that spoils some of the mystique, you know, some of the surprise. And you could just be like, oh, you describe this, so it's a troll, or it's a bugbear, or an umber hulk, or this type of thing. You know, it's an ithalid, and that can kind of get like a DM down. I mean, sure, the characters might not know, but the players, you know, and there's a little bit of meta there, and that's the problem. Um, I think the whole concept of there are certain books that only the DM should have should really like stick around. Like players these days should get more in line with that. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to see everything. You don't need to just understand it all. Like, well, how can I optimize and make my character great? I wouldn't worry about it. I would. That's part of the fun. You know, discovering what is that six-armed monster. You know, with like 10 legs. What is that? I don't know. What's that five-headed giant that's coming down with different breaths? And you know, not a Tiamat dragon, a giant. You know, just making things up, but it makes it more interesting, you know, like when you experience a crawling claw for the first time and it's like a dozen of them burst out of an armoire in an inn somewhere, and you're getting one latched to your face. You don't know what the hell it is or why it's doing it. You're freaking out, especially when you're new to the game. It makes the experiences more thrilling. If you're like, oh, it's the crawling claw, just turn undead. I'm a cleric. It's like, ugh. Like great, I knew what that was. My favorite are actually. Let me not get too off topic. So I didn't DM with that group again, at least. But I first started my successful first DMing with my friend Sean. Um, I believe I had him make. Actually, when I started my DMing career, believe it or not, I didn't have any books. I didn't have a player's handbook. I didn't have a monster manual. I didn't have a DM's guide, and I started in second edition. Nah, the only book I had was my Baldur's Gate 2 instruction manual. I'll actually show that to you right now. This book right here. And you're thinking, how can you learn Dungeons and Dragons in this game? And my friends used to make fun of me, like at the time, the other ones I played D&D with, not like ha ha ha, you're a loser, but like they would say things like, it's not proper Dungeons and Dragons in there. The rules aren't 100% official. It's okay. It gave me a grasp. It gave me the steps to learn, and it taught me the game. And it had a lot of the rules actually. Like if you actually look into this manual, it explains everything pretty well, like the racial bonuses and drawbacks, the class abilities they get, the different weapons and armor and how much they cost, spells and what they do. There were even some creatures in here. Like this book was really cool, a very useful tool, especially in my early days learning the game. It was amazing. Um, Particularly, I enjoyed it like a lot, just going through it. Like this is what I DM'd from right here, and I made a lot of everything else up in my head. Like I didn't need a book. That was the best part. You don't need, besides the basic rules for the players to get their characters going, you don't need a book, you know? And that's what was really cool. But let me see if I can show you some examples of some things in here, like THACO tables or things like that, just to show you what I'm talking about, where I learned from. See how I kind of got a grasp on the rules. I know, like with 5th edition, that's not too necessary these days. Yeah, they even have spells like fully fleshed out in here. Items. Yep. All right, so they might not have the costs, but jeez. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Progression tables. Look at this. Ability score progression tables right here for strength, dex, and con. You see that? And look, they have it all the way listed up to 25 because 25 was the max stat you could get in second edition. And once you reach that, you were godlike in that stat. Like 18 was like brawlic. See, then they even have the class experience tables right here. You got fighter, paladin, ranger, the hit die they get. I could just learn it all from right here. And what else? What other progressions do we have? The paladin spell progression. You can see the spell table they have. Ranger abilities, like the percentages of hide in shadows and move silently. That's really cool. Wizards and sorcerer experience table. Yep, wizard spell progression, wizard specialist requirements, all right here, all right in this book. And I don't know. This book was just so cool. Like this was playing with them was my gateway, but this was my gateway to DMing. Believe it or not, a Baldur's Gate 2 manual, an instruction manual for a game, came with enough explanation on how to play the game to where I could competently play the game and successfully play the game. Look at this. They even have the weapons and their speed factors broken down, damage tables, who can use them, everything. This was great. And I sold my second edition books years ago when I was in a pinch for cash, but I have this old one right here that someone left at my house years ago, and they're welcome to take it back if they really want it. I don't need to keep it. I plan on rebuying the second edition books. I had the alternate covers. I think it was the ones that might have come out years later. I think this was the first iteration. I could be wrong. These ones, yeah, there's not much color pictures in them at all. So this is probably the first edition of second edition. I had the second iteration with like colored pictures and everything, and it kind of had like the Hulk and Barbarian on the front, and he's like knocking down, super buff, and he like I believe he knocked down a door, and I forget what else is in the cover, but I had all those books. Like I remember collecting them. Like I got super pumped. Like once I decided I was starting to DM. I got sidetracked again, didn't I? So anyway, my first successful DMing was my friend Sean. He made 3 to 4 characters. I would run like a bunch of one-offs with him, but he could use the same characters, and we would use this to play and level up and determine abilities and things like that. It was really cool, you know. Um, and then as the more I got into it, I was able to find and buy the books. I would go to like used bookstores or things like that, and I would pick up like a player's handbook or this or that, for like cheap, or eBay, and I would pick up those little brown paper pamphlets. That was like, oh, this is the barbarian pamphlet book, or here's the book on all the different elves and elf types, and there's like 12 different elves or things like that. So I was collecting those books. I remember I had psionics, I had monster races, Ranger's book, Barbarian Handbook, the Sorcerer Handbook. And out of the second edition books, I think I had 4 or 5. I had the Player's Handbook, the Monster Manual, the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Unearthed Arcana, and I believe there was Player Spells, Options, and Feats was another one. I think that was a separate book from the Unearthed Arcana, if I'm not mistaken. I had like 5 books, but yeah, I sold them all to this guy. I think it was like $40, maybe $100. It was either 40 or $100. Either way, no matter what the price, it was a fucking steal. He got a really good deal on it. But yeah, so I started playing with my friend Sean. We played a lot. Um, then I would play with like people randomly too, like all sorts of people. I would just play with whoever I could, like whoever wanted to play. If they wanted to play, I'd introduce them to the game, and I would always introduce it like this: "Hey man, or hey whoever, you ever play Grand Theft Auto?" And they'd be like, "Yeah," and I'd be like, "You know how you can kind of do anything in Grand Theft Auto?" And they're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Well, that's what this game's like. You could do anything." And they're like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yeah, but it's not a video game." And I would have to explain tabletop to them, and then they would be interested and want to play. So my first like big group of like, I think it was 4 people. It might have been 5. Was one summer. It was my cousin Mandy. She played a dwarven fighter. She was really excited on the idea of a dwarven fighter. She's like, "Yeah, I'm the short little brawling bitch that just beats ass." She loved the idea. She was just so pumped. She's like, "I could be super strong and just like beat ass." She's like, "Fuck yeah, I want to be that." Um, our friend Mike, he was really tall. He played a half orc barbarian. Um, our friend Joey, I forget what he played. I think he played a bard. He might have played a half elf bard. Uh, God, who else? Our friend Carl, different Carl. This is a different Carl, not the original Carl. Um, he played a dwarven fighter as well. I think he named him Dwarf. He had the worst names. And his brother Mike, I believe, played. So there were 2 Mikes, and I forget what Mike played. He might have played like a paladin or a ranger. But yeah, that was like my first group. We played that during the summer. We probably played that about a half a dozen times. I think they got to level 7. I know what you're thinking, level 7 half a dozen times. Maybe not level 7. I could be exaggerating. This was a long time ago. I might have been 15 or 16 at the time. I started DMing probably in the year 2000. Uh, and then I remember I'd babysit for this one lady. She had a son named Dustin. I brought the game to his house. I let him make like 3 characters. Um, he enjoyed it. Oh, jeez. I rolled up my nephews as soon as they were old enough. I had them play. My nephew, his first character was a wizard after his own name. Yep, he enjoyed that. My first group that actually stayed long term were my friend Dave, Adam, and Carl. But Carl later dropped out because he lost interest. He decided he just doesn't want to play D&D period anymore. But my friend Dave made a character who was a half elf bard named Dawnstalker. My friend Adam made a halfling rogue named Miller. And my friend Carl made an elven ranger named Davimus, who we later changed the name to Dragonov because we thought Davimus was silly and we kind of liked the campaign to be a bit serious. It's good times. And then we introduced other friends into the campaign later, like we introduced a friend Dale, um, and a friend. Why am I blanking? Scott, friend Dale and Scott. Dale was a barbarian minotaur, Hell Rider. He was beast. And then there was the Scott was a human monk named McTane. And my friend Dave's girlfriend joined at one part. well, ex-girlfriend now, but at the time it was his girlfriend. She had a human cleric named Tyr, or I believe her name was Iltiar Nenharma in Elvish, because he used an Elvish translator, but if he translated it, it was Tyr or something. I don't know. But she was around for a bit, and then when she dropped out, he took over the character. Um, she was actually really useful later on. The character, so good. Uh, since he had a second character, I think everyone else was making like double characters. So then Adam made, or no, he took over Dragonov, which was Carl's character. So uh, Scott made a half elf fighter named Virgil, and then Dale made a shaman, some type of dragon shaman. I think that's when we transferred the game to third edition because we started in second and we ended the game in 3.5 edition. The campaign ran for about 10 years. Players went from 1 to 20. Uh, it was really long. Had a lot of fun moments. There were a couple parts where it dragged. Um, the last session I think was 8 hours. It was very long. A lot of emotion in that session. A lot of emotion. And like as you're building this campaign world, you kind of like build places, and you start to chart them out. I remember we had this tournament on this island, and it was supposed to be this great magical island. And I remember taking those poster boards. I took like two or three of them, maybe even four of them, and put them together and made this giant island, mapped out places of interest you could go. Uh, had a book that was like several pages of the things you could buy there. You could buy all these different weapon types. Um, oh, let me take a swig of water. You could buy all these different weapon types. You get weapons made out of different materials, like ruby, emerald, sapphire, diamond, gold, silver, and certain weapons would give certain effects. The cost would go up and down. You could do the same thing with your armor, you know. But ugh, it was great. I remember when the one person won the tournament. Uh, there was a conflict of what to do because their boat broke and no one wanted to pay the money to fix the boat. They all just wanted to buy like a cool, like the person wanted to buy like a cool selfish weapon for themselves. Like I just need this cool selfish weapon. And so we had to do a time skip because there was a small period of time where we're all busy in life and we didn't play for like 6 months. And at the time, that was a long time. We were playing like maybe once every 3 weeks, once a month back then. And we took a 6 month break and life was busy and we got back together. And so we did a time skip. I did a 5 year time skip. I'm like, all right, I'll advance the plot 5 years. And that kind of made it even more interesting. They were more hooked at that point. But the whole purpose of the story is the world was being developed. Players were going from point A to point B. The world was starting to get fleshed out, and characters wanted to revisit places they've been before. So it was kind of interesting. Like, hey, we've been here. Can I go back? Or, hey, could we go back to this place? Like, it was just interesting to see the progression and how they went from like maybe like they started here, and they went through like out the world, maybe went to this place, this chain of islands, this continent here, uh, and they'd probably been through at least like a third of the world at that point. But I don't know, I'm lost for words. I don't know where I was going. We were gonna make a sequel campaign that piggybacked on the back of that. That was gonna be fifth edition. Um, we played a few sessions, but life again got in the way. Haven't played it more since. It's pretty decent, but I think they might have been looking for something else. Like I think the certain plot point they were at, they just weren't interested, and life got in the way and didn't go anywhere. But no big deal, because you can always start different campaigns if you need to. You can always get new ones going. That's the best part. If a campaign doesn't work out, you can always, hey, you guys want to start a new one? You folks want to do this? You want to do that? Um, I've run one too a while ago with Dale, Adam, Scott, and my one friend Sean there. This one had to do with a dwarven mountain that had a catastrophe. He was a, I don't remember if we decided he was a full-blooded orc, even though he used a half-orc template. This is 3.5, by the way. Or if he was a full orc or half orc. But yeah, his name was Felthok, and he was a warrior. He used a two-handed maul. Um, at the time, I don't believe the maul did the appropriate damage, so I upgraded it to 1d12 for him, and I made it massive. Like I think I had the thing weigh 50 pounds just for flavor, you know. But yeah, Dale was a dwarf. He was Duke the Dwarf Nukem. Yeah, sometimes the players like the things they come up with or don't come up with. My friend Scott was a paladin with no charisma, so then he sacrificed himself at one point to kill himself so he can make a new character who was a sorcerer, a human sorcerer. I think his name was Matthias, but he spelt it Matthias, and we used to rag on him all the time about that, and he'd be like, "It's Matthias." And my friend Adam was Corlash, the Black Hand or something, and he was supposed to be a Shadow Knight. Yeah, that was also a different part of the world where the characters were like developing and stuff, and you see the world starting to shape. You start to see it like, hey, this happened here at this part of the world at one point, and this is happening here in the future in the world. And sometimes you can also bring different story points from other campaigns into that world, especially for other players who are familiar or who might not be as familiar. They might. It's an Easter egg for some players, I feel, especially if they played in previous campaigns. Um, Like I had one character that was reoccurring. The DM character I had, his name was Rosette. He was a human sorcerer. He carried over from that 10-year campaign, and he was in another campaign where he suffered from amnesia, and he didn't remember who he was, and he had a different name. And as the game progressed, you found out who he was. You're like, oh, that was Rosette the whole time. That type of thing. Like, wow, it's interesting. You know. So the whole purpose of this, aside from introducing myself and talking about my experience with Dungeons and Dragons and the groups I've played with, I also introduced my one cousin. His name's Ed, to the game. He was against it at first, but we did a one-off with a character, and after the one-off, he became hooked. He was like, "Wow, I really like this game." I'm like, "I know, I told you you would like this game." So I played with him. We started a campaign that didn't go much of anywhere. We played a few sessions. We lost some people. I played with my wife, uh, him, my one friend, a different friend Sean. He dropped out. My friend Nate from way back in the day. He dropped out. Um, and that was it. So just because the chemistry didn't work out so well, so that campaign unfortunately had to go. And then we started up another campaign, which I call Akron's Dungeon. This big mega dungeon I have. This evil mage gets you in there, and you kind of wake up in there, and you're like, "What is this?" It's like a death trap type dungeon. You go in there, you're gonna encounter things. Played that with my friend Pat, uh, my other friend Sean, Cristobal, my cousin Ed. Played that for a bit. Still about level 5, and I remember I brought that back for a different audience. It was my friend Scott from before, my friend Adam from before, my cousin Ed, and my friend Cristobal. We brought Akron's Dungeon 2.0 for that. Oh no, I'm sorry, Cristobal wasn't in that. This guy Jeremy was in it. Then I had this other campaign. This one was my wife, my first friend Sean, with his now it's his wife, but at the time his girlfriend. Um, my wife's friend Sarah, and she had a couple of her other friends play before, like her friend Angela and her friend Cole. And my friend Crystal eventually joined that campaign. That one we played. That one took place in a town called Haydenfeld. And what was happening is these giant insects were coming in and kind of abducting people in swarms and things like that. And it was causing mass havoc. And people had to, well, the adventurers were tasked with kind of like figuring out what was going on and saving the town and blah, blah, blah. Game was pretty decent, but a lot of the people were unreliable. So it kind of fell apart when your players are unreliable. Whether and it doesn't mean like just them as a person. Like what I mean is like oh they might have to work. Um, Something else might be going on. There might be a false excuse. Maybe sometimes someone gets sick a lot, or they might have to like take care of someone when their schedule's kind of shaky is what I should mean, not unreliable. But I guess unreliable isn't always being in the game. But I guess a shaky schedule is a better way to put it. So that game fell apart because of that. And I met some people online later on. Played some cool games, made some friends actually. Roll 20. It's a good place to make friends. I play with this guy named Brendan and another guy named Braxton and this guy named Andrew. They all know each other. Um, we had so many games that we would like to spontaneously play up. Some of them we'd play several sessions. Some of them we would one off. Um, Always like anytime a new source book comes out, oh, we gotta try it. We gotta try these options, and we've been doing that. And then, man, just so many games. Sorry. So when you're coming up with your games, and if you're a long-term DM, you might start be thinking to yourself, well, maybe I want to build my own setting. Maybe I want to build my own world. But how big do you want your setting to be? Is it a city? Is your, setting size? Let's look at the setting size. All right. How big do you want your setting to be? Well, let's say maybe our setting size is a city. Okay. Or maybe it's a country. Or maybe a continent. Or maybe a planet. Or a galaxy. Or who knows? Maybe it's an illusionary realm, such as a dream. Or it could also be just in the house, right? Like the settings in this house or dungeon, maybe construct of some sort. So these are some examples of the size you might want to get in your setting. You got to determine. Um, and a lot of times you're going to start small. You might start off with your first village, city. Here, let me village, town, things like that, etc., etc. You might start off with your first like little village, town, or city, and then start to grow out and branch out. And oh, it's a country, and then oh, what other countries are around? It becomes a continent, and you might get real ambitious or creative, and you might start to build the world. Like, okay, well, I've gone this far. What else do I want to do? But you might want to be careful because if you do too much at once, especially too much just in general, it might all just be bland and not have enough depth. But that also might be good because if you want others to sandbox in the setting, you kind of want them to help paint the picture. You know what I mean? You're going to want them to help make the scene, really, because not for everyone, but Dungeons and Dragons, for a lot of people, is a cooperative gaming experience. Like collaborative storytelling, everyone together. You know, oh, you got the one dungeon master who's they're the computer. You know what I mean? They're computer. They're the brains. They're the god. They're the they have the final say. And players, this might come as a shock to you, but there are no rules for the dungeon master. The dungeon master doesn't have to follow any rules. And I know what you're thinking. Ouch, that hurts. Why would I want to play in a game where they don't have to follow rules? I'm not saying just because they don't have to follow rules, they shouldn't, but they don't have to. All right. If a dungeon master wants, they can lie about a stat roll. They can lie about this. They don't even have to roll. They can just say a number. And it would be kind of stupid of a dungeon master to be like 8 billion. You know what I mean? But they could. And they can do a myriad of things. You don't have to play in that game with that type of person. But just remember, especially for you dungeon masters that are new, you have complete total freedom and control. You don't have to follow any rules. You don't want to have to not make it fun for your players though, to where you're breaking the game and screwing them over and saying, "Well, I cast Cure Wounds, but it didn't work, and it did the opposite. It hurt my guy," or "I cast Fireball, but ice came out of my hands." Like at least not for any stupid reason. You know. You don't want to do that. Maybe if it's like a plot device and you've been playing normally all along, that's fine. But if you just start with the whole game upside down on its head, you're gonna send your players away. So once you get the size determined, and it's going to progress slowly, I think it's going to evolve naturally. You're going to start small, and it's going to grow big naturally if you continue to play in that sandbox, if you continue to invite other people around, if you continue to explore other areas. And there are other people, or not other people, but there are other companies who've made successful other worlds, other settings, and they use the fifth edition rule set uh, as a background. You know, an example of that. Let's take a look here. I have the books right here. The Adventures in Middle Earth, the Player's Guide. And this is published by Cubicle 7. Right there, Cubicle 7. You see that? And you could say it uses the 5th edition rules they say here. And the way this works is you're allowed to use the OGL, the Open Game License, for this. So whatever you can use through that. You can't use Wizards of the Coast owned IPs. So for example, you can't go throwing Beholders in the book. You can't go throwing Ithalids. You can't do certain like spells. Obviously, you can't do setting related things. Like I can't have Elminster running around in here, or they can't anyway. Um, you can't. What was I gonna say? Umberhawks, they can't be in here either. But there's certain things that aren't allowed because Wizards of the Coast owns the IP. Like I believe psionics is another thing. Like that's their term. You can't have psionics, but that's okay. It's that's the whole point of a different setting. It's supposed to be different. If it was supposed to be the same, why not just play Dungeons and Dragons, right? Especially when it's not even Dungeons and Dragons related. This is Lord of the Rings using a Dungeons and Dragons rule set. And the way they handle things is kind of interesting. Like everything's not uniform. Some races in this game might get a +2 to an additional ability score, and some others might get a +1. Uh, just, I don't know. I guess this one gets a +2 because, well, it doesn't get a bonus thing here. Maybe that's why. Oh yeah, there are other settings. Like there's Primeval Thule, which is supposed to be more of a sword and sorcery. Conan the Barbarian meets Cthulhu. Uh, Low magic type of world. So that's another thing you got to decide about your world. Is here. Let's go this world, right? Setting. So like these are the different settings you could have in the world. All right, sword and sorcery, low magic, high fantasy, um, steampunk, right? Maybe you could have revolutionary, modern day, futuristic. These are just an example of some of them. You see? So, for example, low magic world might not be able to, or you're not going to be able to obtain certain spells. Like maybe you can't raise dead. Maybe you can't go invisible. Maybe you can't fly. Maybe you can only do certain things like cantrips, for example, because it's a low magic world. High magic. All right, magic is everywhere. It's common. You know, I can find these things at any vendor. Like um, high fantasy. You're going to be doing all the heroic things. Think of Jason and the Argonauts, or what's that one movie there? I have it. It's on my shelf. Where's my fantasy shelf? I have a shelf of my fantasy movies. Where is it? Oh, it's down there. It's on the tip of my tongue. Oh, Clash of the Titans. Yes, like Clash of the Titans with Perseus, or Odysseus. Things like that. Or Conan's a little more sword and sorcery, but high fantasy, where you do these epic things. Where you go and you fight the Kraken, or you slay the dragon, or you ride a Pegasus off into the sunset. Uh, Obviously, some of you might. Well, I can't say obviously because some people are new. Steampunk. Like things that are. It's like pseudo modern day but it's not using modern technology. It's using like steam to power modern day things like trains, uh, boats, guns, automobiles, things like that, helicopters. And it's very rustic looking. Like you have like a lot of metal pipes, uh, kind of like a rusty look. Um, a lot of clockwork stuff, steampunk, revolutionary. It's like going to be the Revolutionary War, that time period, for example. Modern day. I wonder what that means. I don't know. And futuristic. So for futuristic, you're going to think things like Battlestar Galactica, Star Wars, Star Trek, Aliens. Where it hasn't happened yet, but it could. Like with some realism. Like laser guns and plasma pistols and lightsabers and things like that. So that's like what type of setting are you thinking you want in the world? And how are you going to get your world to relate to that setting? So for example, if you have a country, and you want that to be the setting, which one of these did you want to choose? Like what path did you want to take? Um, and that's a question you got to answer because that's going to determine the play style of your game too. So for example, if you're doing a steampunk type game, how are you going to portray that? So let's move on to the next one. Portrayal of setting. This is important, and I'll tell you why. Because how are you going to bring the setting to life in the game, right? You can't just be like, yeah, it's a steampunk setting, but none of the rules have changed. Like nothing's different, everything's the same. It's just that we'll say that playmill armor is the steampunk armor. You gotta give it like I feel like it's necessary if you give it a mechanic, or not necessarily a mechanic, but some way in the game that it shows that it's different. Some way the game plays where the setting you're trying to portray is different. It feels different, you know? Like, for example, in low magic, you would lessen what type of magic is available in the world, the frequency of magic items, if at all. High magic, that stuff, magic's everywhere. High fantasy, for example, you're fighting all types of crazy stuff. That has to be modern day. You'd have to have cars and guns. You'd have to have rules for cars and guns and technology and bombs and things like that. So that's how you would kind of portray your setting. So, for example, if I want to do a nitty gritty, like I don't know, Lovecraftian world, I would have to get like, be very dark, very descriptive, kind of bring that like tension and dread and a little bit of horror in there. And then have the tentacle monster attack you out of nowhere. Or I'd have to work with like some type of, like for example, in the Dungeon Master's guide that we have here, I have to use some sanity. Right, what page is the sanity on? I don't even know. It's an optional. But yeah, maybe you might need to have new mechanics in your game, new stats. Um, that's other things you'd have to think. And you know what? This Dungeon Master's guide actually kind of talks to you about like how do you want to build your setting too. They kind of help you out. Like that's what D&D is about. I don't know if you folks know this. It's about homebrew. Because I want you to realize something. It was all homebrew until it was printed. Gary Gygax, for example, all right, and his friend Dave. What's Dave's last name? Starts with an A. Somebody please tell me. But don't lambaste me, please. Don't get super angry and mad at me and say I can't believe you didn't know that. But let's use Gary Gygax for example. He was working on these things and he would test them on his kids, and he might test them on his friends too. And it was all homebrew at one point. Ed Greenwood, right? Forgotten Realms. He apparently was working on that since he was 8 years old. So he had this fantasy land in his head, probably inspired by things like Lord of the Rings and C.S. Lewis and such. But once Dungeons and Dragons became available, he probably saw an outlet to put that in, so he was able to kind of homebrew that. TSR took over, and then now Wizards of the Coast owns it. I'm pretty sure Eberron, right? Who did Eberron? Was his name Keith? Darn, I'm failing again. I'm terrible at these names, but I believe his name was Keith. I could be mistaken. I'm sure Eberron was homebrewed at one point. Uh, Nader Vale, right? Isn't that a homebrew from Mike Merles? Isn't that a setting that was in 4th edition? The point is settings, pretty sure always start as homebrew, unless the company's on a mission, right, where they go into work and they're like, all right, we have to make a new setting. This is what we're going to do. I'm sure that's happened. You know what? That's probably happened. But let's not worry about it. Like Spelljammer, it's probably homebrew, right? Some guy's probably like, dude, wouldn't it be cool if you can go to all the other settings? Just imagine how awesome that would be. Yeah, I kind of miss TSR. Wish they would come back, get the rights to D&D again. Yeah. Anyway, um, so how are you going to portray your setting? I don't even know why I have a thing yet because I haven't started typing. So let's see what we can have. You can do it thematically, mechanically. I think thematic and descriptively would be similar, but you know what? I'm going to put it anyway. Descriptively. And, ooh, yeah. Get some art. Oh, whoa. What the heck was that? Artistically? Let's just get a lot of Lee words in there. So, the theme, you're gonna bring the theme alive. That's gonna be the thematics of it. The thematic setting. Mechanically, rules. Something in the rules has to portray your setting. I feel like it would be a good benefit if that were the case. Um, and your game doesn't even necessarily have to be Dungeons and Dragons. It could just use It could be like the Lord of the Rings game that I showed you. Where it uses 5e, but it's not Dungeons and Dragons. It's Lord of the Rings. Descriptively, in your descriptions and the way you talk about the game and the world. Like, for example, you have an area of big, giant, rainbow-colored mushrooms, but there's also a low purple fog that seeps in, and there's twinkling of stars 24/7, even when the sun is out. Like that's like some type of description that sets the theme, and people are like, "Oh, it's very strange," but I'm kind of getting an idea of what the world is. And artistically, only if you're good or if you have lots of money to pay someone, you can have people commission work for you. Wait, what? You can commission work for people, is what I meant to say, and have visuals of it too. Unless you're good at it yourself, then you can do it yourself. You know what I mean? If you're good at any of this stuff, you can do it yourself. But a lot of the times it takes a team. You're going to need that artist. You're going to need that creative person. Some very rare cases, there are some people that can do it all. Like they're the savant. They can do the art. They can do the creative process. They can write it up all themselves. And it does happen. Um, there are like video games, for example, that have come out that have been made by one person, and some of them are impressive and some of them are pixel art. But you know what? It doesn't matter. You got to start somewhere, and it has to be done. But portrayal of setting, right? How are you going to portray that? It's very important. What's the next part? Ah, yes. How about this one, right? Not just a portrayal of the setting, but what makes your setting unique? Or not unique, but special. What gives it that special flair that you might not be able to find in another setting? Or that just makes players want to play in your sandbox? What is going to bring players to want to play in your world? All right. This one's a little tough because everything's been done. And I'm sure everything's been done again and again. So you're probably not going to have an original setting unless you try to purposely go so outlandish out of the box, right? Like I have a bacon wrapped TV monster that plays guitar on its knees while licking spaghetti out of the sky, and your player that's a Christmas ornament that's shot out of a cannon at Mach 5. Like unless you get that crazy, and there's a weather effect where sprinkles rain from the sky and donuts blow up in outer space and the crumbs come down, and we call that uh, donut day. Like unless you're going to go that crazy out of the box, your settings probably going to be very similar to other settings. Not always. It doesn't always have to be, but you got to think of, all right, this is my setting. This is what I want to portray. What other settings are like this, and how can I do this different? So, for example, if you're looking for dark fantasy, right? What comes to mind? Game of Thrones, right? Game of Thrones is kind of a fantasy setting. They have White Walkers, things like that. There's like a very dark world. There's things in there like rape and incest and murder. People get their faces bit. And I don't mean like zombies. I mean like another live human biting another human. Things like that. So if you want to portray dark fantasy, how can you be different than Game of Thrones, right? Or dark horror, right? Call of Cthulhu. I probably spelled that wrong. Somebody yell at me if I spelled that wrong. All right, like how can you make your different than H.P. Lovecraft's world of Cthulhu? Just any of his writings. How can you make it different, or at least how can you make it stand out? Um, Sci-fi. There are so many different ones, like Star Wars, Star Trek. Hmm. Battlestar. I don't know too many of them, but there are a lot. Starship Troopers, Riddick, right? Like, how can you make them stand out? How can you make yours different? So you got to look at these and see what they have. And I'm saying if your setting fits into that category, you gotta look at other settings that are similar, see what they have and what you can do different, what you can bring to the table. Um, High fantasy, right? So we'll go Jason and the. Wait. Oh, my spell check is off. Oh, wow, I could be spelling things terribly wrong, and you all could be making fun of me right now. Why is my spell check off? Auto spell check? It's on, right? Jason and the Argonauts. That movie. Oh yeah, Clash of the Titans. Hercules, right? With Dwayne the Rock Johnson. That's what I'm talking about. So what have they done? Right? What type of world are you setting? Or you can even just look at. Here we go. Here's another example. I got you. I got you, folks. Real world examples. Hey, you know what? Real world is full of mythology, is full of knowledge, is full of stories, is full with so much, right? That it's a treasure trove. There's so many different cultures, so many different people, so many different stories, so much richness out there. So let's take a look. You can think, you can look at all these cultures. Maybe you want to draw inspiration from the Incans, the Mayans, Aztecs, right? Egyptians, Byzantines, Sumers, uh, Sumerians. That's what I should have said. Sumerians, Byzantines. No, it's the Byzantine Empire. I think what I meant to say was the Babylonians. Wow, Babylonian. You know, how about the Irish? Or we'll just put Norse. Right, peaks. Just all these types of people, right? Japanese. Why is that tabbed over? That's weird. The Chinese. So you can look at all, like these are just examples. You can look at like their mythology here, and you can See what types of stories they have, what stories they share in common, what type of mythological creatures they have, what type of, like, I don't want to say heroes. Well, I guess heroes, right? Like, who are their heroes? Like, what do they talk about, and what type of roles they played? Because that can also give you ideas for class roles, um, which we're going to go to the next part. Whoops, what the heck is going on? Character building. Now you're going to be thinking, oh man, what am I going to be doing? What's this character building BS? Well, first thing you're going to want to come up with is a background for your characters. Like, how do they obtain a background? How to obtain a background. Does your character have a class or a role or a job? Is your character like part of a specific race, creature, ethnicity, or ancestry? You know, um, what powers do they have? Powers, abilities? See, how is your character? What makes the character special? What does make them special? That's a good question. You gotta ask. Like, how are my players gonna feel special playing this character that they have created? And that's one thing you're gonna have to learn in your setting. Like, okay, I have my slime men. All right, that's not that's the job you take on. You take on the job of slime man. What's a slime man do? Oh, they can squeeze through things really tight, and they can morph into different blobs, and they can spit acid. Well, it's kind of sound like a creature now instead of an actual job. Okay, well maybe it's a job. Maybe it's a creature. Then you get to be a slime man. You get resistance to certain things, and it's really cool. You get all these powers. Oh, cool. I want to play a slime man. Um, just something that intrigues your players there, your target audience. It's another thing. Who's your target audience? Let's try to get this down. All right, so the who's of the target audience is who is your target audience? Why are they your target audience? And how are they your target audience? So, who are you marketing this game towards? All right, or the setting. All right, do you want the setting to only be played by a certain demographic? Or do you want the setting to be accessible to everybody? Are you having a certain age range on it? Like, is it a mature setting, like some dark fantasy, kind of like Game of Thrones? Because you don't want kids playing that. You don't want 8-year-olds running around playing in, a dark fantasy setting, you know? So, you got to think, who are you gearing your setting towards? Why are you gearing your setting towards them? For example, dark fantasy. I'm gearing my setting towards older folks, people 18 plus. Why? Because I don't want young kids exposed to this type of material, and I don't want them in there seeing this. Or I'm doing, like, maybe you're doing a kid type fantasy, you know, something for little kids. Hey, I want people 12 and under into here because this is a setting for kids. This is a setting for people just learning the game, just getting into tabletop role playing. I want something that kind of like Narnia, like that could be a setting in itself. Oh, they go into Armoire and they go to this magical fantasy land and this war with all these mystical beasts and all these kids who turn into adults and time goes so slow. Or Harry Potter, like that type of setting. Uh, so why is that your target audience? Some adults might like that, but might be more kiddish. And then how? How are you going to bring that to your target audience? How are you going to portray that to them? How are you going to get them to know, like, it's for them? Like, when you write the setting, how are you going to get those people to know that this dark fantasy setting is for adults? You put boobs in the cover? No. You're going to have to come up with a way where you're going to get the setting, show that it's for adults and mature audiences. I got a big giant M on the book that stands for mature. Parents don't always read that shit. That's the worst part too. Parents are terrible, right? I worked electronics at Target. selling video games, and parents were buying their kids 12 and under Grand Theft Auto, Saints Row, Call of Duty, you name it, they bought it. And I would tell them what was in the game. My favorite was describing the GTA because I'm a fan of Rockstar's games. I love their games, but I would warn parents. I'd be like, just so you know, I know you're buying this for your kid, but there's a scene where a character has some bent over in a meth lab and he's banging her doggy style, and he gets interrupted and he goes outside and smashes a dude's skull in with a beer bottle. That's an actual scene from the game. Trevor does that, Johnny Klevitz, and I would describe that scene to the parents. I would say 9 out of 10 times the parent would then not buy the game for the child. But it took me to describe it to them, right? Because they would look in the back and they would see the rating after I would tell them about it, and they'd be like, "Oh, well, sexual themes and stuff. There's like no boobs, right? They don't do anything bad, do they? I mean, his friend Johnny has it. Oh, I'm so glad his friend Johnny has it because his friend Johnny has it. He should have it too, right? Yeah, you should be irresponsible, dipshit parent. No, so anyway, I would explain it to them, and 9 out of 10 times they would put it right back, and the kid would look at me with such disdain, like I was the most evil man alive. Like, sorry, I'm not trying to get you to be a little delinquent. See, when I played Grand Theft Auto when I was a child, it was top-down pixels, and all you could do was turn people little red splats. Okay, it's not like today where you can go to a strip club and put money in their G-string, and you see their titties and things like that, and you can also have car sex and hear orgasm sounds. All right, Saints Row. Be like, yeah, dude, your character can have a dildo bat and beat someone to death with it. Don't get that for your kid. I always looked at the parents though that like have their 8-year-old and they would be like, oh, his friends got it, he's gonna play it anyways, so I'm gonna get it for him. Yep. I would just shake my head and be like, that's why some people are just dipshits. Their parents don't raise them right. They're just playing fucking these games at like 8 years old. Look at me with my bat with a dick on it. Or look at me at the strip club, swearing, saying obscenity. Anyway, I'm too off topic. So how are you going to portray this setting to your target audience? How are you going to do that? That's what you gotta. That's what you gotta do. You gotta figure out how. And once you establish that, you're gonna move on to the next step, which. So what do we have so far? Your setting size. Determine that. World setting. What's it going to be like? You know, what's its role? Portrayal of setting. How are you going to portray that? What makes your setting special? Think of others like it. And how do you separate it from them? Real world examples. Don't be afraid. Why is this here? It's so weird. Maybe if I go like this. What the hell just happened? Oh, I'm fixing it. Yeah, you're getting fixed. There we go. Fixed it. Boom. Character building, right? For the players. It's for the players. And target audience. Now your next step is actually fleshing it out. All right, but we'll worry about that next time. Because right now, we've been going for about an hour. Um, Anyone who's watching, I appreciate it. I'd like any feedback. I will do this as a weekly topic if you're interested. I'll come in, we'll talk. Um, well, we won't talk. I'll talk. You can comment maybe as it's going. I'll address issues later. Not issues, but your comments, concerns. These will be posted on YouTube, so you can watch the backlog. You can see what I've been going on about, and actually be reviewing, not reviewing, but going over my own custom world that I'm making. Like how I'm going to set it apart differently. So that'll probably be the next episode where I'm going to dive into this, my own world, and go a little further with this. So if you like what you saw here, please let me know. All right, I need the feedback. You only get better with feedback. Um, you only continue if people are actually watching, right? I can't do 10 of these episodes with nobody watching. That'd be weird, right? And no one notices. And it's like, well, why am I doing these episodes? Is it catharsis for myself? Does it get me through the day? Does it make me feel like a better person that I could do that for myself? No, I'm just doing it because I think someone might get some interest out of this, some help. Even though the first half hour might turn you off. It's just my backstory. So people might be like, oh no. I gotta listen to this guy talk about his backstory. I don't care about him. I'm just here for the information he could possibly give me. I'm not gonna waste an hour of my life. Um, but yeah, next time we're gonna dive in to a little bit further of this and myself. So for all you sitting at home, thanks for joining me. I'm glad you came and you took a moment to watch. Please don't be shy. Feel free to comment. And like I said, if you miss any of this or you miss any future videos, they'll be up on YouTube. Just look up Slit518 on YouTube. You should be able to find my videos. And if you're interested in my homebrew world, take a follow and we'll be doing these. All right. Good evening. And thank you for stopping by.